Let's talk about voluntary departure. Hi, I'm Jim Hacking, immigration lawyer practicing law throughout the United States, out of our offices in San Diego, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., and Chicago, Illinois. In today's video, we're talking about voluntary departure. This is a tool in the immigration lawyer's toolbox. This is one of the options that somebody might have if they find themselves in deportation. Now, of course, we never want clients to have to take voluntary departure. It's a very sad state of affairs. But in immigration enforcement land, the way things are with Donald Trump and ICE and these quotas and these bad immigration detention facilities, we thought we would make this video to educate you about one option that you might consider if you find yourself in deportation. So in order to understand why we're talking about voluntary departure, we have to take a realistic assessment of where things are in 2025. So here we have Donald Trump got reelected, and he named Thomas Homan in charge of Immigration Customs Enforcement and all of the deportations that are going on in the United States. We have quotas that have been set by Stephen Miller and Thomas Homan, where ICE is expected to deport 3,000 to 7,000 people every day, and they are doing everything they can to meet those quotas. They are filing more cases than the immigration courts can handle. Courts are swamped with cases. They have thousands and thousands of cases. They could not try all of them in years and years of trying. And so we have a situation where a lot of immigrants who find themselves detained thinking about voluntary departure. And that's really where voluntary departure comes. Most people who are in the United States who aren't detained wouldn't rationally consider voluntary departure. They would probably just figure something else out. They might file voluntary departure as the case gets closer to trial, but ordinarily you wouldn't file voluntary departure as soon as you receive a notice to appear. But this is for people that are facing detention. And what that means is if you are taken into custody by ICE, they can put you in an immigration facility, they can put you in a local county jail, and based on certain circumstances about your case, you might be subject to mandatory detention, you might be just detained because ICE feels like detaining you, and you might be asking yourself, do I really want to stay here in jail, in detention for weeks and weeks or months and months, while facing the trial of whether or not I get to stay in the United States in front of a judge who deports almost everybody that appears before him or her. So voluntary departure would allow you to leave the United States and to avoid a deportation order. And if you really fear staying in jail for weeks and weeks and don't want to do that, you could tell the judge, or you could have your attorney tell the OCC, the Office of Chief Counsel, that your client has decided to take voluntary departure, and you sign a joint motion with immigration and take voluntary departure, and then your client starts moving through the process, which we're going to describe in today's video. Let's talk about someone whose name I've changed, and we'll call him Samuel. Samuel came to the United States on a visa. He was going to be a student. He applied for asylum. His asylum case was pending. He dropped out of school, so all he had left was his asylum case. He also got in a little bit of trouble at Walmart. He had shoplifted something. ICE found out about his arrest in the city of St. Louis for shoplifting, and since he was detained, they decided to take him into custody, and they said, okay, Samuel, you can have your hearing on your asylum case. You've lost the opportunity to have your asylum case decided by an asylum officer because now you're under our custody. We're going to put you out in the St. Genevieve County Jail where you're going to sit. And so you sit for a few weeks before you see a judge, and you have to make a decision. Now, when you look up the statistics, you find out that this judge denies 98% of the asylum cases that appear in front of him. Do you really want to sit in jail for 3, 5, 8 weeks, waiting to have your day in court, waiting to have your case decided by this judge, and he's going to most likely deny your asylum case? Why would you put yourself through that? You're most likely just going to spend more money. You're going to endure having to sit in jail all that time, and you're going to have to face the judge at some point, who's most likely 98 times out of 100 going to deny your asylum case. So that's the kind of situation where you might think about voluntary departure. You don't have any other defenses. You don't have any qualifying relative family members in the United States. You might be able to get cancellation or a waiver of some sort. You have no legal status in the United States. Your asylum case might have some merit to it, but like I said, even if you put together the strongest case possible, this judge denies almost every single asylum case. So you have to come up with a sober decision of whether or not you want to put yourself through this. Do you want to spend extra money on attorney's fees? Do you want to sit in jail for another 2 months? Or do you just want to go home? And that's when you might think about taking voluntary departure. What is voluntary departure? Well, voluntary departure is where you waive your right to trial, you waive your right to contest whether or not you're removable, and you say to the judge and to the court, I concede the allegations in the notice to appear. I concede that I overstayed my visa, that I don't have a statutory basis to stay in the United States. I'd like to raise my asylum claim, but I'm not going to do that because I don't want to slow down deportation. I just want to get out of here as fast as I can. And so I want to take voluntary departure. It helps you avoid a deportation order. Now, not everybody's eligible for voluntary departure. If you've previously taken voluntary departure and not left, or if you've taken it before and come back into the United States, those would be two of the situations where you can't get voluntary departure and you're just going to have to take that deportation order. The benefits of not getting a deportation order is if you haven't been out of status that long, if you don't have a 3-year bar for being out of status for more than 6 months or less than a year, or a 10-year bar for being out of status for more than a year, then you could, in theory, go back to your home country, and let's say you have a new reason, a new way to come, perhaps through marriage to a U.S. citizen, then you wouldn't have that bar of a deportation order. A deportation order itself carries a 10-year bar, so that's one of the mechanisms they use to get people to take voluntary departure is, hey, at least you won't have this 10-year bar on coming back because of your deportation order. Now, if you have the 10-year bar from the overstay of 1 year, that would still be in effect and that wouldn't help you as much. Voluntary departure, like I said, if it's a non-detained case, usually comes at the end of the case. If it's a detained case, it might come up sooner simply because the immigrant doesn't want to fight it, doesn't want to stay in jail, and just agrees earlier on with OCC and the judge that they want to just take voluntary departure. In order to qualify for it, you have to show that you have a valid passport, you have to show that you have the money to pay for a ticket, that you don't have any crimes. If you have any aggravated felonies, you're not going to be eligible for voluntary departure, and that you have good moral character. These are the kinds of things that go into a judge's consideration. Most judges, with their goals of trying to deport as many people as possible, they're going to grant voluntary departure. I think they're even going to bend over backwards to give you voluntary departure if it means they can increase their numbers of people they kicked out of the United States. Now, once the judge signs the order of voluntary departure, if the judge grants it, that doesn't mean you get to get out right then. You still have to wait for ICE and for the process to work itself out. What does that mean? Well, that means that ICE is going to have to figure out how are they logistically going to get you back to your home country. You're going to pay for your ticket, but they want to have an ICE officer go with you from the immigration jail to the ICE office, then from the ICE office to the airport, and they want to make sure that you get on the plane. Now, if you live in a city like I do in St. Louis, where you're going to have a connecting flight, then logistically they also have to have an ICE officer meet you in Chicago. When the judge grants voluntary departure, you have to wait for all those logistical keys to open up. They tell you which flight to buy. You don't get to pick a flight. You can't ask them for different flights. You can't ask them for flying on a cheaper day or a discounted ticket. They tell you the ticket that you have to buy, and that's the ticket you have to buy. You buy the ticket, they go with you to the airport, they make sure you get on the plane here, they make sure you get on the plane the next time until you're on that international flight where they think you're just going to go back home and stay there. In most instances, you're not going to be shackled, you're not going to be detained or tied up in any way. You're going to be able to bring a bag. Here in St. Louis, they say you can bring a bag of 40 pounds, a suitcase with stuff of your choosing, and that's going to accompany you on your flight. When you land, you can check in with the U.S. Embassy to make sure that you have proof that you arrived and that you went back to your home country. That might be important if you ever want to come back to the United States or to obtain some other immigration benefit. You want to make sure that you keep that proof that you provided to ICE so that they know that you left the United States. That way you can avoid that deportation order. So why would anyone take voluntary departure? Well, we sort of talked about that. It avoids a formal deportation order. It's going to get you out of the United States faster. It's going to get you out of detention faster. It keeps the opportunity, although a narrow one, for you to come back on some future reason or some future basis. So there are those reasons why you would want to take voluntary departure. For Samuel, it meant that he got to cut off 2 months of waiting to see an immigration judge who was most likely going to deny his asylum case. He made the decision finally to throw in the towel and to not seek asylum in the United States, to not have his day in court. It was certainly a sad situation, but I certainly understand it after seeing and hearing about the conditions of the detention facility that he's staying in. And of course, that's what ICE wants. They want it to be bad. They want it to be nasty. They want the food to be gross. They want you to be overcrowded so that you hate it. And so you just throw in the towel and leave the United States. So in a big way, that's a big win for ICE, is just by being so mean and so ornery, they get you out of here and they boost their numbers. But of course, voluntary departure carries a lot of risk. You know, you're going to lose your opportunity to stay here. You got to leave your life behind. You lose your ability to work. You lose whatever reason you were here in the United States, whatever connections you have. You're going to have to go back to your home country. And if you're someone like Samuel, you fear going back home because that's why you filed your asylum case, right? So it's a tough decision. So if you're thinking about what should I do? Should I take voluntary departure? Should I not? And you're talking to your immigration lawyer, you want to know some things. What is this judge's approval rate? Who appointed them? How long have they been on the bench? What did they do before? Did they work for the government deporting people, or were they a defense attorney? There aren't many immigration judges who were defense attorneys anymore because Trump keeps firing them, but it is good to have the whole picture before you make that decision. Sometimes you might want to stay and fight. Sometimes you might want to take voluntary departure. You got to make a good decision, and you got to have all the facts in order to do that. So in conclusion, you never want to start with voluntary departure. You never want that to be your number one plan, but sometimes that's all that you have. I was talking to a guy from Palestine the other day. He's overstayed his visa by years. He's been working without permission. He has no legal basis to stay here. He has no one that he's related to that would constitute a qualifying relative. He doesn't have love in the air, no marriage on the horizon. He has nothing when it comes to being able to stay in the United States. He said the jail conditions were terrible, and he wants us to get him voluntary departure. So I understand it, and we'd be happy to handle that for people. It's not our favorite thing to do, but when we're talking to people about a loved one who's in detention, that's certainly something that we discuss with the family and with the inmate to make sure that everybody understands what the options are and to see why it might be better to hire us to work on voluntary departure. We can reach out to the OCC sooner. We can have everything ready. So if we can't get the order issued before you have your initial hearing in front of the judge, that at least everything's ready on the day of the hearing so that the judge knows what your plan is, and we take it from there. If you want our help, and you're thinking about taking voluntary departure, if you have a family member who's in removal and you would like us to represent them, 314-961-8200 is our phone number. info@hackingimmigration.law is our email address. That's for people who are serious about hiring us. If you're not serious about hiring us and just want some free information, we've got a ton of it. You can join our Facebook group. It's called Immigrant Home. We have thousands of members in there talking about the immigration process every day. We have our YouTube channel with thousands of videos, including hours and hours of the live immigration answer show recording that I did. That's me answering immigrants' question, and you can join us on the immigration answer show 3 or 4 times a week for an hour and a half. We also are active on LinkedIn and TikTok at Immigration Hacking. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.